Reaperman here with some unverified Steam Deck fun. These are 10 unverified Steam Deck racing games that work with little to no work. Now, my criteria on this may be a little looser than Valve's. For example, I'm not going to require these things support exactly 1280 by 800 or anything like that. If there's black bars along the top or the sides, I consider that a win. I also do test them for at least 10 minutes, and some of these are going to have some prompts that you need either the keyboard or a mouse to get through. Most of them kind of don't, though. So to start off with, we're going to look at Ampersand. Now, Ampersand is it's a good example of a game that all of these games are going to run in the current Proton, which is 7, but Ampersand is going to require a controller profile, and the reason for that is this particular game doesn't support controller. Its menus are driven by mouse, and its gameplay is driven entirely by keyboard. So we can actually go into Steam, click over here, click over one more, and now we're into the realm of controller profiles, and I have built this controller profile for it. So basically your X key is your go and your Z key is your shoot. So I've bound X to R2 here, and also L2 is Z. Both of the bumpers, left and right, are both left click because you need that to get through menus. And let's see, both trackpads are going to be your mouse. Arrow keys are on both the D-pad and the joystick, and your A button is go, and either your X or your B button is the shoot. And I should pretty much cover that thing. And the reason I mention it is these controller profiles are not actually as simple to do as one might assume. You look at it at a glance and you figure, yeah, what you see is what you get here, but it's not immediately clear when saving and sharing happens. Well, sharing, yes, but not saving. So several times I've failed to commit settings properly. And I also noticed that despite me having shared this, I'm not seeing under community layouts, I'm not seeing my layout. So I don't know if that just takes time or what. If somebody can check for me, it's just going to be this Steam Deck Ampersand layout by me down there. And again, this is just binding keyboard and mouse. So none of the rest of today's games are going to need that kind of fiddling with. I just kind of want to make sure that I've got my workflow down as far as actually submitting these things. So Ampersand is a hover racer, if you couldn't tell. It's a little like Wipeout. I don't think it's going to be anybody's favorite game, but it's very small, so you may want to check it out anyway. Unlike a lot of these, you do tend to lose a fair amount of speed around corners if you take the corners too sharply. And interestingly, I mean, I guess it's just weird for a game to do that doesn't feature analog steering. So as you can see, I'm doing particularly poorly at it. But we can try and shoot whatever will. Or I'll just drive through that guy. Boom. Boom. You're not going to see any brilliant gameplay out of me today because I'm kind of spooning the camera. And again, the reason I'm doing that is because when you're talking compatibility, you don't want this thing hooked up to an external monitor. Because the external monitor is going to be 1080p, and that's way more compatible. So let's go ahead and let's exit out of this one. Doop doop. Doop doop. And if you're getting sick of me kind of going through these slowly, feel free to check chapters. I'm not going to hold you back here. There's no secrets about what I'm covering here. So let's go all the way to the bottom to the W's. We're going to do Wacky Wheels. Now, for those of us who grew up on PCs instead of Super Nintendos, unfortunately, Wacky Wheels was the best kart racer we had. And it's not a bad game. Wacky Wheels and Scunny Kart, actually, were the two biggies. And it's not a bad game at all. It's just not what Mario Kart was to Super Nintendo owners. Now this game needs nothing to work. Now I've installed hundreds of games. Most games are not that way, but this game just works out of the box. Your go button is your R2 down here, and also the A button if you want it to be. Now your next most important button is going to be this 90-degree button up here on Y. It quickly rotates you 90 degrees in whichever way you're steering. If you're not steering either direction, it does default to left, which is maybe a little annoying a couple of times. X over here is going to be your shoot button. It's going to, track obstacles, and there's track pickups and stuff. You shoot those things out. And B is a combination of your 90 degrees and your shoot at the same time. You will never use that. But yeah, this is Wacky Wheels pretty much as I remember it. Of course, I probably remember it just a little bit smoother than it is, but you know, that's how nostalgia goggles go sometimes. And I have looked at this on my actual DOS machine, and I can get it smoother, but for high detail mode, this is pretty much what you can expect here. And yes, this is high detail mode. So we can try and shoot something. Oh, I didn't pick up any of the little hedgehogs. Whee! Boom. Ah. You see, I'm mostly using the 90 degrees, and that's just kind of muscle memory. Because the go button is actually on R2 as well as A, the R2 button makes it easier to do these quick 90s. So back in the day, if you were there with your Gravis joypad, which is what most people used for this, it was actually trickier to pull this game off. You'd have to two-finger it on the face buttons. Well, let's quit out of this before I have too much fun here and bore you all to death. And let's move on to, backing out of here, let's go up to Grid. Now, if you watched my last video, you heard me say that Grid 2019 is actually my favorite verified experience on the deck, and it runs at ultra low settings, and it's got a fairly consistent but kind of lowish frame rate. Grid 1 actually does kind of work with some caveats. Now, Grid Autosport will also start up and work. I have not tested this enough to say that it's verified yet, though, but I have spent a fair amount of time in Grid 1, so let's go into that one. Now, one thing to remember about this one is you are going to have to input a name first off, and it's going to skip that for this one. Don't worry, I've used an alias for this video. But it's going to stop you until you bring up the Steam on-screen keyboard, which is Steam key and X. And unfortunately, you're going to have to put your name in blind because the actual display of your name is behind the keyboard. But once you do that, you shouldn't ever need the keyboard again in this game. So that's kind of nice. It's actually a pretty good game. It is a bit of a product of its time, though. So this is a 2007 game. And because all of the movies from around 2007 were kind of brown, a lot of the games from 2007 were kind of brown. And I think that was a technical limitation of cameras. Like digital cameras of the time, because they were in that kind of between film and digital era where film was really better, but digital is so much less expensive. So, yep, brown sky, brown ground. And we're just gonna kind of get a feel of this thing. Look at how silky smooth that frame rate is. I mean, you would expect, because this is a 2007 game, it lost complete traction rear-ending that guy. Again, do not expect awesome gameplay, and that was a wall. Do not expect awesome gameplay. I'm really spooning this camera. Now, let's go to, we're close to the eyes. Let's go down to, well, actually, that's the S's. Let's go down to Super Indy Karts. Yeah, my notes aren't in any super particular order. Now, if I recall, Super Indy Karts sometimes puts up the button prompts for the Switch controller, which is something you will see a little bit on Steam Deck. It shouldn't be too big of a bother. Now, I think this game is still in early access. Yeah, Z to start. Which, I guess A to start, really. So let's go into these Ultra Cups. And we'll just pick all that stuff and go here. Yeah, last time I tried this game out, it was kind of mostly Super Nintendo style stuff, and now they've added these fairly modern kart racing goodness kind of levels here. And you know, your jump button is back here and your go button is A, and it should feel kind of familiar to Mario Kart fans, but this thing is very much its own thing in terms of handling in some ways. You'll get used to it, it's alright. You still drift and boost and all that kind of dumb stuff that kart racers do, but yeah, that's pretty impressive fun time here, and it's got your favorite indie characters in a game that's, I think, is better than most of their, you know, source games. Okay, let's back out here and go to the next one. I've got Riptide GP2. So Riptide Renegade, as you can see from the green check mark there, is actually Steam Deck verified. Riptide GP2 is not, and this is one that's near and dear to my heart because back on Ouya, I did exactly what I'm doing with Steam Deck, which is testing way too many games that is not technically supposed to run. Like, you know, back in the Ouya days, they weren't in the Ouya store, I was just side-loading them. But Riptide GP2 was my favorite game from those days, actually. And never did make it to the Ouya store, but yeah, you could sideload it just fine. The same holds true today. Probably gives you the Xbox button prompts, but to be pretty much the same buttons, just not color-coded. So your go button is down here on R2. Your brakes are actually up here on L2. And yes, I believe it does describe them as brakes. And then you got a turbo over on A, so you can kind of knock yourself out with that thing there. And then you use the analog sticks to do tricks, and just barely had enough time to pull that one off. So again, we're not here to showcase my terrible gameplay, but that game does work. Now, All-Star Fruit Racing. We'll move up here. By the way, eventually I will get around to testing Futanari Vampire Girlfriend. Don't worry, I got you, fam. I know you're really interested in knowing if that game works. So we'll roll up to the top here, and All-Star Fruit Racing. This perhaps isn't my favorite of the kart racers, but it does work. Now, interesting thing about this thing, the controls are fairly standard. You know, you go, you stop, you steer. But to actually do your pickups and weaponry, you actually click the R button. And it actually does prompt you if it thinks that maybe you haven't figured that thing out. Which I sure have to reteach myself that basically every time. So let's go ahead in here. Let's get a game going. Come on. Oh! All of these loads, by the way, are going to be SD card loads. None of these are on the fast storage, by the way. So, yep, we got Xbox button prompts, and we'll just do an offline. We'll do we'll just do a race. We're just going to mash A until it actually takes us into something, because that's the best kind of demo. Alright. Apparently it was not loading in the background, it was waiting for me to hit A that one more time. That's a little suboptimal. I sound like Captain Complaints here, but this is actually, now that I've got a fair variety of games that I've discovered here, the sharing is actually kind of fun for me. So let's go ahead and drive around here. Let's grab a pickup. And it's going to come over on this side of the screen, and then you just kind of click, and that actually dropped behind me, of course. Let's try and get one that shoots forward so we can see it a little better. You will just probably have to trust me that you click on the R3 to shoot these things, because we'll try and pick one more up here. That's an amusing little thing. Anyway, that's about all of it I think this video needs. Now, since we're up by the A's, let's go down to BallisticNG. This is another game that just happens to work out of the box with everything, default controller layout, that kind of thing. You may have to do some stuff like, on some of these games, you may have to do some stuff like disable this trackpad if your thumb's getting too close to it, that kind of thing. But, yeah, you shouldn't see too many problems with that on these racing games. I have noticed that kind of problem tends to come with a lot of flight and space games, which will probably be another video. Oh, it's loading a content pack. Alright, so just go ahead and we will do the old smack on go. Whoop. Has been a few days since I played this one. This is going to be one of those where you're very much a Wipeout clone here. So your go button's going to be over here, and then you got leans on the actual trigger buttons, as I was leaning more than steering. Whoop. So this is actually default graphic settings and all that too. This is just how it looks, and hopefully you do much better at this than me when you're not spooning a camera. Okay, let's move back to another one that's a little bit kind of near and dear to my heart, is Formula Retro Racing. I actually love this game. Pro tip on this game, stay out of the draft. You will rear end them so hard. Just stay out of the draft, and it doesn't really handle like virtual racing, especially in the draft, but I think you'll figure it out here. It's got kind of the virtual racing look of untextured polygons, but there's a few references to other Sega games in here that I think I'm catching. Alright, let's do an arcade. And sure. Let's do advanced. Pick all that stuff. And again, this is still default control, default Proton. Everything today is default Proton, which is version 7. Because I know sometimes you get games that Proton breaks after upgrades. But all these are working with the current round of them. Got into the draft there, picked up some damage. But you can kind of see what this one is about. Droop. I don't believe this one has cloud saves though. Well, I know it doesn't because it didn't pick up all of my unlocks. Alright, so let's see here. Let's move on to Neon Drive. Neon Drive isn't really a racing game, it's a dodge the stuff game. There it is. Almost like a rhythm game, or kind of one of those into the screen runners. You know, not the side view runners, but the ones where you're behind. In this game, pretty much everything that has to do with this side of the controller will move you that way, and pretty much everything moves you the other way on the other side. So basically, X is going to move you that way, B is going to move you that way, L and R are going to move you the respective directions, and of course the actual D-pad is going to move you the corresponding direction. But you may have to actually hit buttons more rapidly than you can double tap, so it's nice to have options to do like a left arrow and an X together to move over to, as I move over none. But yeah, you can kind of move over two if you hit them in really rapid succession with your different hands. Boom, good enough. Exit game. Now, the last one I've got for you is the Ridge Racer Unbounded. This is kind of one of the many black sheep in the Ridge Racer franchise. All the Ridge Racer games tend to be a bit different from each other. Go figure, right? Now this one is going to have this screen up here, and you're not going to have a mouse to get through it, so you're going to have to Steam plus X, and then you're going to have to hit R2, which is the enter key. And boom, then you're through it, and you won't need to use the keyboard again. Now, Ridge Racer Unbounded, I would say, almost feels a little bit more like a Burnout game. And in no universe is that a bad thing to say about a video game. Let's go ahead here. It's going to have Xbox prompts, but, we can deal. Boom. The ever famous hit X until game starts. So I really wish Steam would come up with a list that I could submit these to, like an unofficial verified list. So I can just kind of share my findings in perhaps a little bit more concise way than this. And there's actually like a drift button in here too. Is it A? Is it X? I know you get points for drifting, and then you can use that to boost. It's very Burnout-like here. But you guys can figure out the controls. I'm not entirely sure this thing is actually on the Steam store anymore. Maybe it is. I don't know. If not, you guys can probably find a key for it somewhere. Boom. So yeah, I guess those are the 10 that I have for you today. I hope that was 10. If not, tell me that I can't count, because it looks like I got everything on the list. I don't think I skipped anything. But yeah, so I've pretty much been spending my time like I do on the Ouya, which has been loading games that aren't supposed to work, and it's kind of a little bit of a miserable experience that brings me down a little bit, but when I find them, it feels pretty good. Feels pretty good. And this is actually a pretty decent system. It feels a lot more like a computer in desktop mode, obviously. So I actually tend to probably prefer it over there a little bit more. The Steam mode feels kind of like, with what I do, the Steam mode feels a little like a broken console, I would say, but you know, you just kind of got to deal with what it is. And I know they said that the Steam themselves would be crawling through their library and coming up with verifying all the games, testing them out and all that stuff, but we're giving them a quarter, and it seems like they're not really, you know, at least not up to the speed that we would expect. And I kind of wish there was like an emulator compatibility list, but for Steam Deck, where I could go in and just kind of post my results and use as a starting point to see what actually works on this thing. So I may do some more of these videos. I may do a themed space one next time. I don't know. The space ones seem to rely pretty heavily on the keyboard. Wouldn't it be neat if instead of it being 1280 by 800, if it was 1280 by 7 standard 720p resolution, but then along the bottom you could have touch controls for all the things that space games do? I don't know. Just kind of a food for thought on making this thing a little bit better, a little bit more usable. You know what? I think I've rambled on enough. Until next time, Reaper Man out.